correspondent and MSNBC political analyst Peter Baker. All right, so Ryan, a recess appointment. We've been talking every day about whether Matt Gaetz or Tulsi Gabbard or Pete Hegseth can get confirmed. It seems like Trump is really testing the boundaries here. And it seems like from the outward assurances from allies that they're willing to go as far as he wants to go. Is that the same thing you're hearing on Capitol Hill when people are not talking to a camera?
You know, I think it depends on who you talk to, Katie. And I do think we need to set the standard here for what having to go to a recess appointment would mean for the incoming Trump administration. We're not talking about Democrats standing in the way of a Trump nomination. We're talking about Republicans standing in the way of a Trump nomination. There's a real possibility. Of course, we're still waiting on Pennsylvania to finally finish counting its votes. But Republicans should have a 53-seat majority. And that would mean that if one of these nominees were not to get through, it would be because Republicans do not approve of one of these nominees. So taking the recess appointment route would be a radical departure from how this process normally plays itself out. You've seen in past administrations when presidents have used recess appointments, it's because they were headbutting with the opposite party. You know, in this scenario, you would be asking Senate Republicans and perhaps House Republicans, if they went to the point of adjourning for 10 days, to buck the will of some of these Republican senators who believe that they have the responsibility as a co-equal branch of government to keep the executive branch in check. So, you know, I think there are a lot of Senate Republicans who behind closed doors are uncomfortable with the notion of just handing away this advise and consent role to the Trump administration to just input whoever that they'd like. They believe it is their solemn responsibility to help the president in this scenario and make sure that the candidates that he is putting into these places have been properly vetted and have the necessary qualifications to do the job.
Just to underscore what you're saying there, I mean, Mike Johnson may say very calmly that it used to be just so normal and nobody would get in the way of this. The president can have who the president wants. What makes this so insane of a situation and puts Republicans in this bad position is because, and Peter, I'll go to you in this, these choices are so extreme. They are so out of the norm. They are so not people who are traditionally qualified for these very large positions.
Has done here is pick people who believe in blowing up the very departments that they would run, right? That he's picking somebody to be attorney general who has been a subject of a Justice Department investigation, who has said that the ATF and the FBI ought to be abolished altogether, who has criticized the Justice Department for being corrupt and politicized, and then wants to come in now and run it. Now, what the Trump people would say is, well, that's because it needs to be cleaned up from the Biden years. But it's very unusual to see a president try to put somebody in one of these departments who has such a radical agenda and then try to do it without Senate confirmation. And as Ryan rightly pointed out, it's not the Democrats who are holding it up. That would be the Republicans who would be holding up. He's trying to get around Republican opposition by having these recess appointments. Remember, the recess appointment was put in the Constitution in order to help a president in times when Congress wasn't in town and it took months for them to come back and forth. You didn't have airplanes back then. It wasn't meant to put in a whole cabinet full of controversial people just because you decided you want to have controversial people who couldn't otherwise pass muster. But that's what Trump is trying to do here. And if the Republicans allow him to do it in the Senate, then they've redefined and redrawn the balance of power that the founders first put in a couple of centuries ago.
Yeah, it wasn't controversial because, generally speaking, the presidents have chosen a cabinet that they believed would pass a Senate confirmation hearing. Even if they had to have a little bit of a fight, they believed that the person was so qualified and so upstanding and so necessary for that role that they could get that person over the line. And when it occurred that they could not do that, when there was pushback behind the scenes or an outcry in public, as we've been hearing with Gaetz, with Hegseth, and with Tulsi Gabbard in particular, usually a president would have pulled those nominees back. They would have said, this person can't do it. I don't want to waste time on this. I'm not going to push the issue. I'm going to nominate somebody else. Let me ask you, Ryan, about the Gaetz Ethics Committee report. They were supposed to meet on Friday. It didn't happen. Now we're getting word that they're meeting again on Wednesday. Do you know what's going to be happening at that meeting?
Well, We're told that they're going to discuss the future of this report, whether or not it ever sees the light of day. As you know, the Ethics Committee is very secretive. They keep their deliberations incredibly confidential right up until the last minute. And this is a unique situation they find themselves in. They're dealing with an investigation that they put months and months, maybe years into, and were waiting to release this report, and then had kind of the rug pulled out from underneath them when Matt Gaetz decided to resign from Congress. The reason that you'd think that there's a real possibility that they will hold off on releasing the report is because of the message that's being sent by the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, who claimed that it would be opening Pandora's box and would set up a bad precedent to release this information. Even though there is precedent that has been set, they have released ethics reports after members have left office. So it's not out of the realm of possibility, and there's also no legal prohibition on them doing it. The committee can do whatever they want if they have a simple majority of people voting. The question here in this scenario, Katie, is that you have an equal parts Republican and Democrat on this committee. This isn't a majority committee. The Ethics Committee is specifically designed to be nonpartisan. It would require at least one Republican to join Democrats in order for the report to be released. And if the Speaker's putting his thumb on the scale, there's a real possibility that they just vote to keep this under wraps.
All right, so what about the allegations? Tom, will ask you, what exactly is Matt Gaetz being accused of? And we heard from a couple folks in the past few days regarding those allegations. Give us the scoop.
As far as the core of the allegations, Katie, that really hasn't changed since this all came up 3 years ago, which is the idea, and of course, as you pointed out earlier in the show, and allegations he's strongly denied over the years, that he had sex with a 17-year-old girl at the time, and that there were these allegations as well of sex parties and other things that the congressman, now former congressman, is alleged to have been involved in. There was a federal criminal investigation into this. There was a separate federal criminal investigation because Gaetz points this out a lot, that there was an attempt to shake him down, basically, hey, we can get a pardon from Biden in exchange for money to help out on another tip that somebody was trying to do with the FBI. We could go on and on about all of this. Bottom line is that was really kind of separate from all of the allegations against Gaetz. There was this investigation into Gaetz was focused on this 17-year-old and allegations surrounding that. One person did cooperate with federal prosecutors. They pleaded guilty. They were sentenced. That was a separate case. But ultimately, the Justice Department, according to Gaetz's attorneys, and we've confirmed that with the Justice Department, obviously, they never charged him. If so, he'd be charged. We wouldn't be having this conversation. We have some new details that came in over the weekend. This is from Joel Leopard. He's an attorney for one of the women he says went before the House Ethics Committee that Ryan was just referring to, saying, my client testified to the House Ethics Committee that she witnessed Representative Gaetz having sex with a minor at a house party in Orlando in 2017. So now two questions come up here. One, what were the particular circumstances of that? Could that in and of itself been a violation of federal law? We have previously reported, NBC News has, that Gaetz traveled to the Bahamas with women. Were any of them underage? Was that for the purposes of sex? That could be a violation of federal law, the Mann Act. And if so, why did the Justice Department not bring the case? I mean, ultimately, were these witnesses or the victim herself not credible, or did they make decisions based on other factors that came up in the course of their investigation, or did they just not want to proceed with a case against the congressman? That's going to be important going forward.
And just to remind everybody, the House Ethics Committee doesn't have a legal standard to abide by. They have an ethical standard to abide by for the House when they're coming out with their report.
I'll put one little asterisk on this. From a legal standpoint, for witnesses testifying before the House Ethics Committee, you know, it's a lie. It's a crime to tell a lie to Congress. And so that is one thing to keep in mind when they do produce their report.
And again, you had Mark Wayne Mullen telling CNN last year that Matt Gaetz was going around and showing videos from his phone of parties where he was having sex with women and then bragging about the drugs that he would do to, as Mark Wayne Mullen said, last all night. Pete Hegseth is also facing some allegations regarding women. Peter, what exactly is going on with him, and what's his attorney, Timothy Parlatore, saying?
Yeah, now this came up after the president-elect made the nomination, caught his own transition team by surprise, but he was found to have paid money to a woman who accused him of sexual assault. He says it wasn't assault, that it was consensual, but he paid her anyway. That was part of, you know, in his interpretation, a form of blackmail. But once again, we're in a position where, you know, one of the people that the President of the United States has decided to put in charge of one of the most important departments in government, it has a cloud over him for the kind of behavior that would certainly get any member of the military court-martialed if they were able to prove it. So I think that that's a problem, obviously, in the Senate as well. Trump so far is sticking by Hegseth. We'll see whether that continues. But, there could be other revelations. You never know. Once these doors are open, you never know what comes out.
Yeah. Peter Baker, Tom Winter, Ryan Nobles, gentlemen, thank you very much. Joining us now, New York Times opinion columnist David French. So the title of your column today, David, is Donald Trump is already starting to fail. How so?
Yeah. So if you look at these picks, these cabinet picks, and, we went through the scandals there. The scandals are considerable. But if you actually look at the cabinet picks, a number of the key picks from Tulsi Gabbard to Pete Hegseth to Matt Gaetz to RFK Jr., these are not picks you make when you're planning to govern well. And there are two very important communities of people here if we're talking about Trump support. There's the 17 million. These are the people who voted for him in the primary. This is core MAGA. They love the Gaetz pick, many of them. They love the Hegseth pick because they see Trump as a wrecking ball. But there's the 76 million. These are the people who voted for him in the general election. And an awful lot of those people didn't vote for wrecking balls. They didn't vote for chaos. They were voting for less inflation, for example, or they were voting for a more controlled border. In other words, they were voting for competence. Now, a lot of viewers would say, voting for competence, Trump, but they remember a period from 2017 to 2019 that was perhaps more calm. And so when Trump is nominating people that communicate chaos more than competence, or vengeance more than governance, what he's doing is he's demonstrating that he hasn't heard the 76 million, that he's still listening to the 17 million, that core part of his base. And that is a recipe for failure, because across the Western world, across the developed world, when governments focus on their culture war pet issues, they get tossed out. And they're asking for people to come in and focus on the big stuff. And this is why we see this back and forth all over the world.
The world has changed so much in the past few years, especially with the distribution of information. We talk about this a lot. Not everyone's getting accurate information, reliable information, fact-based reporting. They're getting information through a podcast host who has an opinion, or they're getting information through a meme, or they're just not getting any information at all. I wonder how the Democrats take the chaos that could be to come and convey it to the public. How does the public see what's happening beyond their daily lives? Are they even hearing about Matt Gaetz as a completely controversial pick? Are they hearing about Tulsi Gabbard and her support of Bashar al-Assad, or Vladimir Putin? Are they getting that information? Does the world that we've all come to know and the consequences that we've all relied on in the past, do they still apply?
Well, the short answer to your question, are a lot of these people getting that information? Absolutely not. I mean, if you look at the Trump vote by where people got their information, he lost overwhelmingly amongst people who, for example, get their information from newspapers. He won overwhelmingly amongst people who don't consume political media at all. And that's something that a lot of people forget. A lot of these Trump voters have zero knowledge about a lot of these scandals and things that dominate Twitter for days on end. They just don't know. So what do they vote on? They vote on the conditions on the ground as they perceive them. Now, why is that a danger for Trump? Well, if he doesn't govern well, the conditions on the ground in their lives will not be better. You know, if he does his tariffs, there will be more inflation. If he does mass deportations, there will be more inflation and a lot of chaos in their communities. The sad thing, though, Katie, the sad thing is the fact that they were warned